Ryan Blaney breaks a winless streak and Chase Elliott is suspended for the next NASCAR points race. Let's break it all down in this new episode of Above the Yellow Line. Breaking a 54-race winless streak, Ryan Blaney finds himself in victory lane after the Coca-Cola 600 was postponed until Monday for rain. It was raining all weekend long, but a historic weekend for Team Penske as they also won the Indy 500 with Joseph Newgarden. Also really great celebrations there. They both went into the crowd. Ryan Blaney inspired by Joseph Newgarden as he went into the crowd after he won the 500. Really good races, both of them. We'll talk about that a little bit more later though. Blaney is a driver that we see put together pretty solid days, week in, week out. Sometimes he starts off really good and then he fades towards the end of the race, and sometimes he starts the race really poorly and he's able to make it back up, getting himself within the top 10. This is the first time for me in a while that we've seen him put together a complete day with a win. So very solid for that 12 team in that number 12 cherry lime body armor scheme. It was one of my favorite schemes of the weekend, just straight up unbiased. So I'm glad it was in victory lane. And as a reminder, the last points paying race that Ryan Blaney won was in 2021, Daytona in the fall. I know he won the All-Star race last year at Texas, but wasn't points paying. Something even cooler to note too is Jonathan Hassler. This is his first points race win with Ryan Blaney. So very cool for that duo. I will say that on Monday, Blaney did have the best car. He was able to make moves stick that other drivers weren't. And what I love about going to the track is you can see everything. On TV, you only see snippets of things. So I was able to see where Blaney was better. Then I think for me, Tyler Reddick was his biggest competition on Monday. Even then, William Byron in the second position was a big threat to Ryan Blaney as well. But unlike Blaney and Reddick, I think Byron wasn't able to make moves stick. He wasn't able to truly move forward. If he had the lead, he had it for a bit, but then you knew that Reddick and Blaney were coming along. Of course, I would have to say Byron, though, probably had the best pit crew of the day, was able to get him out P1 pretty much every single time. So with that said, William Byron in the second position, going through the rest of your top 10. Martin Truex Jr. in third. Bubba Wallace in fourth. He had quite the day. And this makes 3 straight top 5s for that 23 team. I think with Bubba Wallace, he's found his rhythm, which I really like to see. He's making consistent gains, and even when he has a bad day or he makes mistakes on track, whether it's him, his pit crew, whatever it may be, he's able to rebound from them, which is something I don't think we've quite seen from him yet on a consistent basis, and I think we're finally starting to see that. So really good job for him. I know there was drama between him and Aric Almirola. This was before the first red flag of the race for rain. Almirola thought that Bubba was racing him pretty dirty while he was racing him respectfully. Almirola then said that Bubba flipped him the bird and then started cussing him out and saying, quote, bad things. Bubba Wallace said, that all was very passion-filled. Aric Almirola then ended up shoving Bubba on pit road. Nothing went farther than that. None of the drivers said what was said to each other, so I don't know. There's nothing really more I can dive into here because that was really it. So take all that as you will. I don't know if there's going to be beef between these two moving forward. There might already be some animosity between the two that I just wasn't aware of. But yeah, so that was the whole situation there in case you were wondering what went down. It was some rough racing on the track that translated to in the car and then out of the car. Then in 6th place, we have Kyle Busch. Crazy that he came back to finish in the top 10 after that spin. 7th, Stenhouse. 8th, Chris Buescher. Great redemption from last year after the flip. 9th, Austin Dillon. And 10th, how about this? Zane Smith in his 600 debut was able to finish top 10. What about that for Front Row Motorsports? A really good day for him. 2 more finishing positions I wanted to note, starting off with Alex Bowman coming back after his back injury. Finished in the 12th position. He said it was pretty sore after the race, but that's what he expected. So really good to see him back at the track and also getting a great result for his team. We'll talk about the points in a second, but he is in right now into the round of 16. Then I also have to talk about Justin Haley. Finishing in the 15th position, Justin Haley made NASCAR history, running the most miles of any driver in the NASCAR National Series in one day. He ran 898.5 miles in a single day, competing in both the 600 and the Xfinity Series race that was postponed for Monday. A very impressive stat. Ty Gibbs coming right behind him. I don't know how they do it. Ty Gibbs was running so well until I believe he had an issue with the steering wheel or something like that in the car that set him back in the Xfinity race. But going from running 600 miles or close to 600 miles to competing and finishing the Xfinity race, I was shocked. But that takes a lot of skill, a lot of hard work. They would have had to have been exhausted after that. So kudos to both of them, but congrats to Justin Haley on making NASCAR history. Looking at the points now that we have our finishing results, like I mentioned, Alex Bowman does move himself above the cutoff line +4, while he moves Chase Briscoe down -4. Continuing to look below that cutoff line, last time we had a points-paying race, Corey LaJoie was 23rd in points. After this race, he moves to 20th in points, so a really good points-paying day for that 7 Spire team. And then if we look above that cutoff line at the round of 16 right now, if we were to end things as they were, Chris Buescher on up are pretty solidly in on points. I'm very impressed, again, I will say it, by that RFK group. Even Bubba Wallace has a really good gap into the round of 16 as things stand. We still have 12 races left in the regular season, so there is a lot that could change, but for those drivers, props to them. Even Kevin Harvick really high up in points. I looked at the actual point standings, just playoff standings aside, and everyone is really close in points. Someone mentioned on Twitter, like, wouldn't it just be awesome to see just the natural point standings play out for the championship without the playoff piece of it happening? I think it would be really interesting with how close the points are. So those are your playoff points updates. Let's get into a major talking point of the 600, Chase Elliott. Following an on-track incident between Chase Elliott and Denny Hamlin, NASCAR has suspended Chase Elliott for the next point-paying race, which is at Worldwide Technology Raceway. Hamlin ran Elliott high, seemed to make some light contact, and then Elliott ran into the wall. It looks like Brad Keselowski might have tapped his back bumper, but Elliott seemed to try to correct himself, and then there was a really hard turn into the right rear quarter panel of Denny Hamlin's number 11 machine. Hamlin promptly said right after that wreck on his radio that NASCAR needs to fine, penalize, suspend Chase Elliott. He followed those thoughts up in his post-race interview. In Chase Elliott's post-race interview, he really didn't mention a lot about the contact, was very just chill, nonchalant about it. On the in-car radio, though, that's where things tell a different story. Elliott said Hamlin ran him over twice in the last 4 laps, and then he said, quote, "Did I miss something or no?" And to me, on that in-car radio, that, in my opinion, shows intent. NASCAR deemed, based on looking at data, reviewing the radio communications, reviewing everything, post-race comments, that this was intentful and chose to suspend Chase Elliott for the next points-paying race. And opinion-wise, do I think this was the right call? I do. I really do. If we're following prior precedent, and if we're even just looking at and hearing that radio communication, to me, that screams intent. When we look at the incident between Bubba Wallace and Kyle Larson, I know that might have been more obviously intentful, especially with the fight in the grass area following that wreck. But it's intentionally hooking somebody in the right rear out of frustration, out of malice, out of whatever you want to call it. So I think NASCAR really did make the right call there in suspending Chase. They're putting their foot down. I appreciate it, and I appreciate the consistency with this call. This is my opinion on it, though. You might have a different opinion, and that's totally fine. But I do think this follows a prior precedent that was set with Bubba Wallace and Kyle Larson last year. So kudos to NASCAR. And I will say, for those out there that might comment about, hey, Keselowski caused a lot of this too, I don't doubt that. He made contact with Chase Elliott's bumper. I did see that. However, with the move that Chase Elliott made to get into Hamlin's quarter panel, I don't understand how that would work. I just don't logistically. And then he was able to go straight through the following turns after that wreck. It doesn't make sense to me, and especially because after you see Keselowski hit him, it is a jarring turn into Denny Hamlin's car. So that's just my opinion on it too. Looking at the data, hearing Denny Hamlin even explain it too, and I know we're hearing the explanation from Denny, who was affected by this, but it was a sound explanation if you listen to his podcast, Actions Detrimental. So that's where I stand on this, and Hendrick Motorsports has decided to not appeal this decision by NASCAR. They understand the rule and the reason that NASCAR suspended Chase Elliott, and they're not going to appeal that decision, which comes to the point of who's going to fill in for the number 9. We have Chase Elliott's normal backups, Josh Berry and Jordan Taylor, in Portland this weekend. So here's what the 9 team decided to do. I know fans have talked about this for a bit, but it's actually happening. Corey LaJoie is going to fill in for Chase Elliott in the number 9. Filling in for Corey LaJoie in the number 7 at Spire will be Carson Hocevar making his Cup Series debut. He posted on Twitter as well that a year ago he had an injury to his ankle. Remember, he was on crutches around the garage area, still able to drive a little bit and able to drive for the most part, even with that injury. But a year later, making his Cup debut, which is pretty crazy, pretty wild. So expectations for Corey LaJoie, I don't know. I mean, that 9 equipment is really good. Josh Berry was able to make something happen in it. And with Corey LaJoie being a Cup regular, just moving to better equipment, I'm curious to see what he can do. I don't expect a win, though, but in case you're wondering the scenario, Bob Pockrest did clear the air here. If Corey LaJoie is able to somehow win in the 9 this coming weekend, he would get into the round of 16, the playoffs. Chase Elliott would not. The 9 car, though, would get into the Owners' Championship. So there is something to keep in mind there. Chase Elliott would still have to race his way in. At this point, Chase Elliott has to race his way in with a race win to get into the playoffs. I think it's mathematically impossible right now to do that on points. So that is what is happening this weekend. Corey LaJoie replacing Chase Elliott in the number 9 as NASCAR deemed his moves intentional on the track against Denny, Hamlin suspending him. Now into the race rating. As you all know, I was at the track this weekend, fortunate to be able to have the VIP experience before I work the rest of the season as media. So very excited about that, but I'm going to separate that bias of my incredible at-track experience versus the professional side of this, which is talking about the racing product itself and talking about what we saw on the track. I will flat out just say, admittedly, this race was not as good as what we saw last year. I think seeing both in person, I think the spectacle of what last year's was, and I will say a lot of the cautions and wrecks did contribute to the excitement of the racing we saw last year, the urgency, and sometimes urgency does make for a more entertaining race, sometimes a better product. I think last year too, with the hot weather, it made the track more slick. It made it more difficult to race. This year, though, it did pretty much heat up during the later half of Monday as the clouds went away, the sun came out. I think the track was a little colder, which made it to where there was more grip on the track. There wasn't a lot of moving around, slipping and sliding. So in that case, the product for me was not as good as last year, but it was still pretty right on par with the excitement that we saw in last year's Coca-Cola 600. I also think this is probably a good time to mention this and apologize to you all. If you remember January 25th of this year, I made a bold predictions video for this coming season. And I predicted that the Coca-Cola 600, knowing my luck, would get rained out. I did that honestly just because I ran out of predictions and I wanted 10 bold predictions and I was like, why not? This sounds fun. It was not fun at the track. It was rainy and miserable for most of the weekend. So to those who went to the track, for those who just wanted to see the racing happen on Saturday for Xfinity, Sunday for Cup, I am sorry. I really am. This is the worst jinx I've ever pulled in my time as a fan and in my time in my professional career with this sport. So I apologize. But we did get great racing in on Monday regardless, and I was happy to see so many people that were able to stay for Monday's action. The stands were actually still pretty packed. Obviously not as packed as they would have been on Sunday or even Saturday, but it was still a great time regardless, and a lot of people were able to stay. Getting back to the on-track action, though, I think this was another home run for that 1.5 mile package. What's crazy to me is a few years ago, a lot of fans, I will say myself included, were wanting less 1.5 miles. I wanted more short tracks. I wanted more road courses in NASCAR. Listen to that, and now that's what we have on the schedule. But because the Gen 7 car and the different racing that it produces, I think we now need more 1.5 miles. I mean, heck, Kansas right now for me is the best 1.5 miles on the schedule. It produces the most exciting racing we see all year. And now the short track package to me is struggling a little bit. I know NASCAR's put in work over the offseason and is continuing to put in work to make that package better. And I think it is better than last year, but it's still not perfect. And the road courses, still up in the air. I think the product has gotten better this year from what we've seen so far with the very few road courses that we have had. But more 1.5 miles. I want to see more of those because this race was just so fun. You also bring in the argument of what we talked about last year too when we talked about the 600 of do we get rid of the Charlotte Roval and make it another just straight up oval course, going back to having 2 Charlotte Oval races a year. Into that, I still say no. I think the prestige in having the 600 be the only oval course is high enough because I don't want to have too much of a good thing. I really don't. And I do also love the Roval. So those are my thoughts there. As for my race rating though, I gave last year's race a 98%, and like I said, this race was still fantastic, not on par with what we had last year, just by the slightest bit though. I'm gonna give this race a 96%, and to add to that and why this rating is still super high on my list, just being at the track aside, the top 5 in the field could not stay away from each other. Usually with the packages that we've seen so far with the Gen 7 car, and even just in the past too with the Gen 6 and so forth, is when the guy in the lead has clean air, he's able to get away. That was not the case with what we saw at Charlotte, which was very entertaining. I felt like the top 5 in the field were always within a few car lengths of each other. It wasn't that big of a gap until the very end, which was very impressive. And the mid-pack racing was also very, very good. There was a lot of drama, a lot of action on the track. I loved what I saw, so I think a 96% is pretty appropriate for the 2023 Coca-Cola 600. To close this out, to all those I was able to meet at the track this weekend, thank you for taking the time to find me, to meet me, to chat with me, and to take photos, whatever it may be. I enjoyed talking to you all and meeting you all, and thank you all for supporting the work. Next race I'll be at media-wise will be Mid-Ohio for Trucks and ARCA, so if you're there, I would love to say hey. I'll be working the event though. I will also be at the Indy race at Mid-Ohio the week prior as a fan. It'll be my first IndyCar race that I'll be going to ever in my life, so I'm very excited for that. But to keep up to date with me and everything in between, especially the live stream this Thursday, we will be sharing our merch haul that we got at the 600 and just our favorite NASCAR merch in general. Make sure to follow my social media pages at _TaylorKitchen_ on Twitter for all breaking NASCAR news, as well as TobyChristieCom for more up-to-date NASCAR news and great motorsports content. And also follow me on YouTube and Facebook at Above the Yellow Line. Again, I cannot thank you all for the support. I have felt the love this past week, so thank you all so much. And until next time, I'll see ya. For more great motorsports content, make sure to watch the videos on the screen and click the link in the middle.